Our first speaker in this afternoon's panel is, hardly needs introduction, and I shouldn't be the one introducing him. Professor Richard Schneider has a Master of Fine Arts from Princeton University, which he received in 1961. Master of Philosophy from Columbia University in 1963. His area of specialization are Orthodox Christian Studies, Liturgical Art, and Iconography. He's an emeritus professor of church history from York University in Toronto. Currently, he coordinates and teaches courses in our own program of Orthodox and Eastern Christian Studies. And he is also, at this very same time, he's visiting professor of iconology and advanced hermeneutics at St. Vladimir's Seminary of the Orthodox Church of America. He represented the Orthodox Church of America on the governing board of the Canadian Council of Churches from 1990 to 2000, and from 2000 to 2003, he was president of that council, the first Orthodox Christian to hold that position. His teaching areas are church history, the use of critical hermeneutics in Orthodox theology, and iconology. He's interested in critical thinking hermeneutic issues which challenge history as theology, ecumenism, and Eastern-Western Christian relations and pan-Orthodox relations. In this connection, he represents the Orthodox Church of America on the Faith and Witness Theological Commission of the Canadian Council of Churches. His latest article has a title that is superbly Richard. The title is Icons of Warrior Saints as Promoting Peace.
Before we get into the talk, I'm going to start with a plea. The best knowledge of our program here at Trinity College, unique in the country, is by word of mouth. And so we're really hoping that after this experience, you will help to spread the word. And in that connection particularly, there's a whole table full of material over there. And I hope you will take away, not just for yourself, but a batch. Take a handful, give them to people, let them know. If you're connected with a parish, take one of the posters, put it up. Right. Let people know what you experienced today. Thank you. Okay, I don't have to give this talk. Professor Wagshall just gave it, but I can put a different twist on it.
Speak into the mic.
Okay, I can put a different twist on it. The issue I'll be addressing is partly historical. That is, what really happened to Constantine and what was Constantine's real policy. But mostly, I also want to talk about implications, because that's the real thrust of this symposium. What was the consequence of this policy of Constantine's, and how are we living with it? It's very much like what you heard from Professor Wagshall. The difficulty is that everybody here presumably knows a fair amount about Constantine, and I'd be willing to bet that almost everything you know comes from Eusebius. That is, the Constantine who gets into our textbooks, the Constantine who gets into our church history courses and so on, is the Constantine described in the ecclesiastical history of Eusebius and various other texts by Eusebius, most particularly the famous panegyric oration in praise of Constantine that was given in his 33rd year as emperor. The difficulty is that we've heard a lot today about rhetoric. We heard it from Maria Simakova, we heard it from Professor Wagshall. These texts have an agenda. And one of the things that I can demonstrate by laying things out in chronological development, it was a fast developing time, as you see on your sheet, is that the agenda itself emerged as circumstances moved along. Eusebius, in short, has an axe to grind, and he's creating Constantine to be the sharp cutting edge of his axe. So to talk about Constantine's conversion experience and Constantine's policies, we have to look outside of Eusebius. We have to look at behavior, actions, what he did, and here the body of evidence is unfortunately quite limited. It's all public evidence, and is to be found in laws. Now, again, following Professor Wagshall's wonderful talk, there is no system of laws, even when Constantine is the sole emperor. There are a series of rescripts, edicts, letters. That's Constantinian law. There are the coins. They're very important. There are the activities that we have a pretty good sense did in fact take place, because they left behind them a big building program. And we have something of the remains of that. I'm going to be looking at that as a way of determining what's going on. And since Bishop Ioan has put the fear of death into me, and I know I only have 20 minutes, it's going to be extremely brief. I'll just try to make my case, but I will hope that you will yourselves follow through. And I will put it in a nutshell. I think Constantine himself certainly was Christian. He was probably Christian way before the famous experience, the so-called experience. His mother was probably Christian. His father was tolerant, and he grew up in an isolated part of the empire in that kind of atmosphere. He certainly knew what Christianity was. He grew up in an atmosphere of tolerance. Okay? The confusion we make is to think that being Christian means either what Eusebius says being Christian means, or that it means what we are today. And we're saying he was that kind of Christian. What Constantine was a late antique Christian. He was a Roman too. And the thrust of his policy is absolutely clear. What he wants is peace and harmony. What he wants is peace and harmony. And everything he does is geared toward that end. And we'll come to some details of that as we go. Again, there isn't time for me to go into the whole history. This is going to be very, very encapsulated. But until the era of Diocletian, which you see up at the top of the page, the 3rd century was a period of extreme chaos, civil war, upset. Not a single emperor died in bed. Not one. Very few of them reigned longer than 4 years. It was an age of cult religion more than philosophical religion, and a bunch of new cults developed, in particular the unconquered sun, which became associated with the military power of the emperor, mostly under the successful reign of Aurelian. Successful, except he didn't die in his bed either. He was murdered by his palace guard. And so peace was not established until the reign of the Emperor Diocletian. Now, you will note that Diocletian comes to reign in an interim between a persecution and then what's going to become known as the Great Persecution. The first global or empire-wide persecution took place in 250. Before that, they were quite sporadic. Then Diocletian came to reign and was trying to follow a policy of peace and order. To do this, he divided up the empire into 4 governmental areas, which you see on the map, and all kinds of artistic propaganda were put out in support of the idea that this promotes peace and that this will promote peace and harmony. Constantine's father became one of the senior rulers. Diocletian, not trusting his senior rulers, took Constantine as a hostage, kept Constantine in his court. And this is where Constantine really learned the nuances of Roman diplomacy, Roman court management, politics, how you administer, how you deal with your subordinates, how you don't get killed in the hallway. So he was learning both sides of the story. Some kind of Christian side, presumably, from his mother. We don't know much about this. Some kind of pragmatic Roman side from his experience at court. Now, from this point on, you will notice that I've divided Constantine's life into 2 different columns. there's an argument there, an analysis. The left column is activities of Constantine which are favorable either to pagans or to Christians whom we would call heretics. The right side column for Constantine is activities that he did which we would call favorable to the promotion of Christianity. What you notice from the columns is that both are going on, not just simultaneously. Often, what he accomplishes with the right hand is immediately contradicted with what he accomplishes with the left hand. Right? And it goes back and forth. You can particularly see that once he becomes sole emperor, the bottom half of the columns. When he becomes sole emperor, he will simultaneously call the Synod of Nicaea and support its decisions, and at the very same moment ask the bishops to reinstate Arius as a bishop. He gets rid of Eusebius of Caesarea, the historian, and puts in as his chief ecclesiastical advisor Eusebius of Nicomedia. He's an Arian who finally baptized him on his deathbed. And so it goes, right down the line. Even in the earliest stages of his reign, and we'll be seeing this, on the one hand, he makes big waves by refusing to mount the steps of the central altar and do a sacrifice in honor of his victory at the Milvian Bridge. And at the very same moment, he puts up the Arch of Constantine, which has no Christian symbolism on it at all, and is a monument to the pagan past. They're simultaneous. You can follow these down side by side. So this argument runs throughout. The point is, of course, that Diocletian's system didn't work. That is, this statue is propaganda, just the way Eusebius is propaganda. What happened was that as the different emperors went off to their different parts of the empire to rule, what each of them celebrated was the success and might of his particular strength, particularly military strength. This monument still exists in Thessaloniki, and it's by one of the juniors who rose to be a senior, Galerius, who on the base of the monument, which still stands, is celebrating the idea of a Roman triumph. Now, it was probably Galerius who instituted the idea of persecution. And we don't really know why, whether he had theological reasons for doing this, whether Christianity was somehow weakening the army, doubtful but possible. But he persuaded a reluctant Diocletian to commence a major 10-year-long persecution of the Christians, called the Great Persecution. This affected a number of people. It particularly affected the two chief writers about Constantine, who, you will notice, wrote their works after Constantine had ended the persecution and reinstituted toleration. So their works are an apologia for Constantine as the savior of Christianity. Lactantius, in particular, had a very nice job as a professor, right? Converted to Christianity, and as a result of the persecution was fired. So Constantine hired him as a personal tutor for his children. He owed him a favor. Having seen the Arch of Galerius in Thessaloniki, what you see here is the triumphal arch still standing in Rome. It's a very famous monument in Rome that Constantine erected with the aid of the Senate immediately after his victory at the Milvian Bridge, his destruction of the great persecutor Maxentius, and the Edict of Toleration. The Edict of Milan and the Edict of Toleration both fall into this date period. Right. Now, you heard from Fotini something about this document. It's extremely important. I don't have time to quote from the laws and the prescripts and so on, but it's extremely important to note that what that law represents, right, is not the establishment of Christianity. It fits into this model that's on your sheet extremely well. What it represents is toleration. What it grants to Christianity is exactly the same state as Judaism had. Christianity becomes what's called in Rome a religio licita, a licensed religion. It's permitted to operate. The very same sentence says, and this is true for all religions. We could hark back to Professor Turcescu's paper. It's a very American type situation. In point of fact, if you look down the column of Constantine's favor to Christianity, his legal and financial favors to Christianity mostly came out of his own personal pocket. They are not state establishment. He gave all kinds of financial, but he was immensely rich as a result of being emperor. Gave all kinds of personal donations, as we will see in a minute. He's a great patron of building. That's all Constantine paying for that. He's seeking, as the documents clearly state, favor with the Christian God. The same way he would have made a sacrifice to seek favor with a pagan God. Now, his Christian sympathies are quite clear. He's willing to strip all the gold out of the pagan temples. He needs it for money. On the other hand, he not only doesn't close down the cult, but as you can see toward the bottom of the pagan column, when he becomes the sole ruler of Greece after defeating his companion Licinius, the first thing he does is favor the Eleusinian mysteries and support a priest of the Eleusinian mysteries. And this is after he's been a so-called Christian for a decade. Right? He, in short, is favoring the good of religion in society for establishing peace to achieve his goal that there should be harmony among all sides. Right? He believed in this so much that he actually wrote letters to both Arius and and Athanasius, asking them to sit down at the same table. Right? That's a bit optimistic, I think. If you look at the Arch of Constantine and look at the diagram, what you will notice is that what it's made up of is bits and pieces from previous monuments with a small strip that represents Constantine's own achievement. So if you look here, that strip right there is original depictions of Constantine's behavior, success, his sitting at the center of the Senate, his distribution of largesse, and so on. And what we have in the other portions, this area is Marcus Aurelius. The roundels come from the great Emperor Hadrian. What he's doing is connecting himself up to the glory of the Roman past. He's making that manifest. He's restoring the glory of the empire. Restoring the glory of the empire, in which all are citizens, Christians and pagans alike. The empire is going to work for them. In practically the same year, you will notice he gets a panegyric oration from a Christian orator, praising him as a Christian. He gets another panegyric oration from a pagan philosopher who decides that he's actually the great-great-great-grandson of the great Emperor Claudius from the 1st century. Completely a fiction, by the way. The orator just made it up. But it's the same kind of attitude as one sees here in this monument. So you can see the strip of Constantine presiding over a gathering of the people and distributing largesse here, compared to the other pieces. And here you can see the same piece compared to one of the reused bits of a monument of Hadrian. Right? You will notice that the bit he reused reflects pagan religious iconography. It's what's called an apotheosis. The emperor is being lifted up to heaven. But here it is. And this is immediately a year after the so-called vision in the sky, of which there is no report until Lactantius writes the death of the persecutors. Constantine is a builder. But in the building practices, right, and he's a generous and prolific builder, but in those building practices, certain consequences happen which are still in some ways with us today. Now I'm kind of moving a little bit into the point that I want to make about we're living with the consequences of Constantine's building. Where people have been going to the little tiny tabernacle that was the grave of St. Peter in a graveyard outside the city walls up on the Vatican Hill, right? Constantine builds this. It was the biggest church in Christendom till the 12th century. The biggest church in Christendom. I think one of the reasons the popes tore this down to build the present St. Peter was that some monks in the 12th century built a bigger church than this. This is not the Cathedral of Rome. The Cathedral of Rome is a church, a basilican church in the Lateran. Constantine gave the Lateran palace to the Pope for a residence and built him a basilica, right, which was going to be the Cathedral Church of Rome. The Lateran basilica would kind of fit into that much space. This church is 3 times as big. Now, that's an interesting consequence. This is a place of pilgrimage. This is marking the grave, right, of a martyr. Which means, judging from the 2 buildings, one is talking about a greater emphasis on place, location, relic, martyrdom, right, going to the holy site, than on what Father Schmemann would call, or Father Zizioulas would call, Bishop Zizioulas would call, Eucharistic ecclesiology, the idea that the church is made in the Eucharist. And it's the gathering of the people into the community that is the foundation of the church, gathered through, right, their regular community Eucharist. This is, in a certain sense, paraliturgical. This is not the only example. Constantine built these all over the city, right? St. Agnes, St. Paul outside the walls, and so on and so on. And another interesting consequence of this is the development of stational liturgy. But the main point is this concentration on the idea of there's a holy site that's somehow more of a special place than the altar itself, which in Schmemann's view would be the holiest of all sites. Right? However, right hand, left hand, virtually at the same moment that he's putting all that money and effort into building St. Peter's, old St. Peter's, he's building a civic basilica, which is just as big. It's called the Basilica of Maxentius because Maxentius started it and didn't finish it. Constantine finished it, and it became the public basilica. In effect, this is the Empire City Hall. Right? You cannot imagine how enormous this building is. The little fragment of it that you're looking at is just one square bay of one wing of the side aisle. And people are just dwarfed inside that. Right? It really was something. And inside that, he put up a colossal statue of himself, one of 10 that were in the city. And this is the old imperial tradition. Right? These are the bits that are still standing. There's a famous story about Vatican II, when a bishop was walking out of the Conservatory Palace and asked then Cardinal Ratzinger, saw the hand and said, "What's that?" And Cardinal Ratzinger said, "That's Constantine, we just buried him." It's an interesting case of our attempt to view Constantine as this modern Christian, one who became totally Christian overnight, that there's a lot of literature that says that what was in the hand was in fact the Chi-Rho symbol, the staff with the Chi-Rho symbol, Constantine's Christian symbol. The amount of evidence for that speculation is 0. That's Christian wishful thinking. If he's going with tradition, what's in the hand is a ruling scepter. what shows this in particular is the money. And money is very, very interesting stuff. Remember that in antiquity, money is a hunk of precious metal. Money has commodity value in itself. The only thing that makes it money, is that stamp, the iconography that's put on it. Then it becomes the legal tender, and people are supposed to believe in it. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in loonies? Do you believe loonies actually buy anything anymore? Right? So this iconography is, again, propaganda, and it's supposed to be effective propaganda. Right? It's supposed to be effective propaganda. Look at the dates. It's the dates that are critical here. Right? So the gold medallion is the year after the conversion experience. The head in front is Constantine as a traditional emperor with a fillet of victory. The head behind is the unconquered sun, the central iconography of that cult, right, that Constantine supposedly replaced. Now, I suppose one could say that all of these Christian bishops around Constantine were teaching him typology, and he was able to understand that the unconquered sun really was Christ. Maybe so. But I don't think so. Especially as Eusebius was rather anti-Alexandrian. And what's more, he keeps issuing the same iconography, the unconquered sun iconography on the sun, on the back of the coin, and it's also in St. Peter's in a mosaic. So what does all that mean? The sun there is in his chariot. He's having an apotheosis. These are in the middle of Constantine's reign as a Christian. Right? And what the motto on the reverse of the coin says, and you notice it's an image of Jupiter with his spear, with his eagle at his feet, and it says, Jupiter, the preserver of the empire. Jupiter, the preserver of the empire. The money continues to be unmistakably pagan. In his celebration medallion, right after this is just after the victory of Milvian Bridge, the obverse contains pagan victories, 2 winged victories. Those winged figures became angels later, but here they're definitely victories, and the inscription says so. And we will see that at the end of his reign, he reissued the same thing. This one's even better. So now he's toward the end of his reign. 330 is the year he founded Constantinople, consecrated Constantinople. Supposedly as to be the Christian capital. And the coin on the left is issued by him, and it's the image of the mythical founding of Rome with the twins Romulus and Remus, suckling from the Roman she-wolf. Right? The coin on the right is issued at the same time by his mother. And it's even more old-fashioned. Security of the Republic, it says, with an old image of the Republican goddess. This is the only coin of Constantine. It's not a coin, it's a medallion. The only medallion of Constantine that has any overt Christian symbolism on it. The one and only, and it's very, very rare. And then, as I said, at the end of his life, celebrating his 30 years, he goes back to the victory iconography. The emphasis on pilgrimage and holy place, one can see also in the building campaigns that were done around the journey of his mother. And perhaps somewhat cynically, I will point out to you that he sent his mother on that journey immediately after murdering his son. This is the Church of the Resurrection, the Anastasis Church, that Constantine built. It's not there anymore. But you will notice that the rotunda, which is the tomb of Christ, is the biggest part of the building. The basilica is small, the rotunda is large. In Constantinople itself, right, the largest church, probably bigger than his Hagia Sophia, was the Church of the Holy Apostles, and that's a pilgrimage church. It's up on a hill. It's not there anymore because it's been replaced by the Fatih Mosque. But that was going to be his burial place, and he moved relics into there, as many as he could collect, so that he'd be buried among the relics. Another consequence of this, then, is the idea that when we need an imperially strong church, we have to build big. Actually, building big is quite rare in Orthodoxy, and it almost always coincides with periods of high imperialism, exactly that symphonia that we heard about from Professor Wagshaw. So when Justinian wants to assert, right, symphonia, he builds Hagia Sophia. It was, for a while, the biggest thing in Istanbul. Part of the point about modernism, as we've heard several times today, is that now, unless you're standing right next to it, you can't see it unless you're out at sea. We're doing it again, with apologies to Bishop Georgi. This is Saint Sava in Belgrade, and you can see how it's intended to dominate the skyline. I'm fairly sure that as progress takes over, the skyline will dominate the church. And so it leads to this kind of thinking. And my final point is that this kind of thinking developed not so much around 315 in the Edict of Milan. That's toleration. It developed around the First Council of Nicaea. This was the spark, because it's the image, finally, of a way that one can have empire-wide unity. To get all the bishops to speak with one voice, that's what the rhetoric says. Historically speaking, they never spoke with one voice, but that's what the rhetoric says. And the iconography of councils uniformly always has to have an emperor sitting at the center, always. This one is rather rare because it has a bishop of Rome sitting there, a pope wearing the papal tiara. Popes, in fact, never attended councils, but the emperor had to be there. This is the image that comes across in Eusebius's oration in praise of Constantine. That's where we get that famous picture of Constantine sitting on this great big high throne, and the council assembling around him, and nobody sitting down until he sat down, and so on and so on. Right? Raises an interesting question. If we're going to have the Great and Holy Council coming up, who's going to be the emperor? And by the way, if I had time, I could show you images like that all over Romania. So there we are. Right? What we're left with is this. The icon itself of Saints Constantine and Helen actually points to the good benefit that we've received from them. The emphasis on the cross. The fact that the cross is this cross, the invention of the cross, marked the beginning of the liturgical year in September and the center of Lent. Right? And so this is the way they're presented. This is the way they're presented. But what they're wearing in this image is imperial court clothes. And if you notice, imperial court clothes are in fact the vestments of a bishop. And so somehow we've got to save this, but get those vestments off them.